Welcome into One of One Sports, the only one for your original sports commentary and analysis. Today, we are giving you our updated college football top 25 post week 5, and we are giving you our week 6 college football predictions. Let's get into it. All right, so last week was our worst week of predictions so far in the season. Our only losing week, we went 2-4, and the margins were thin, right? TCU lost by 3 to ASU, and they led 17-0. We picked TCU, got it wrong. Georgia loses by 3, could have gone either way. Penn State loses double overtime, so you get the point. But point is, 2-4 last week, 19-13 on the season. We got to pick it up, and we have 5 games here. Iowa State at Cincinnati, Vanderbilt at Alabama, Texas Tech at Houston, Mississippi State at Texas A&M, and finally Miami at Florida State. We are still searching for our first undefeated week of predictions. Can we go 5-0? Let's try and pull it off. All right, the first game we are going to predict is Iowa State at Cincinnati. But before we do that, if you guys are enjoying the college football content on the channel, whether it be the predictions, the recaps on Sunday, or our miscellaneous college football content on Thursdays, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to help me grow the channel. Now into the keys to the game. First, I want to talk about the fact that Cincinnati is actually favored. And this is a little bit surprising. It's not shocking, but a little bit surprising. I know Cincinnati's a good team. They're at home. They just beat Kansas last week by 3 in a shootout. But Iowa State's looked really good, and their team, when we unveil my top 25, I think has earned a very high spot in that ranking. And when you look at what they've done already, beating Iowa at home, beating Arizona at home, beating Kansas State in Dublin, I did think they would be slight favorites, but they are not. And then getting into the actual, X's and O's type of thing, where do I think the key matchups are? I think the biggest thing is Iowa State's passing attack and their play calling, because Cincinnati's pass defense has not been particularly strong, and their run defense has been much better than their pass defense. The thing about Iowa State, while their pass offense has been efficient and they average a high yards per pass, it's up there among the top in the Big 12, they prefer to run the ball and average many more run plays per game, and their average call is going to be a run play over a pass play. If they kind of switch that formula and go more pass heavy, I could see them exploiting the Cincinnati defense. I think they have the quarterback. I think they have good enough weapons. If they go more run heavy, then I think the offense could struggle more against a Cincinnati team that would much prefer Iowa State to try to run the ball on them. And then finally, I think a big thing, and I've talked about this with Iowa State several times, is just, are these games going to be close? Because more often than not, and I'm not saying it's every time, right? You look at last year, Texas Tech got them in a close game. But even in that game, Rocco Beck gave Iowa State the lead. The defense couldn't hold on. But more often than not in these tight games, whether it's been Iowa, whether it's been Kansas State, or if you just look throughout Rocco Beck's career, he's come out and delivered in clutch moments to win a majority of these one-possession games. And with a 1.5 point spread, this is a game you expect to be very close. So I think Cincinnati has a good offense, and Brendan Sorsby's been good, particularly with his legs. I think the Iowa State passing attack can make enough plays. I think it'll be a tight game. I know they're on the road, but I think Rocco Beck, in a tight spot, I trust him more to make game-winning plays than Brendan Sorsby. So for that reason, though I think it's very close, I think Iowa State sneaks by on the road and defeats Cincinnati. Second game we're going to predict, arguably the biggest game of the day. This is where College Game Day will be at, and that is Vanderbilt at Alabama. And of course, we have to talk about a little bit of deja vu, because last year, I believe, it would be October 5th, 2024, Alabama was coming off a high-profile win against Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs, which launched Jalen Milroe into Heisman talks and Alabama into national title talks. And then on October 5th, they went to play Vanderbilt on the road, and they got upset, right? The big upset of last season. Now, it ended up being Alabama was really bad on the road. Vanderbilt was actually a pretty good team. So in retrospect, it wasn't as huge of an upset as it seemed at the time. Now this week, Alabama on October 4th, 2025, coming off a high-profile win against Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs, which launched them into contender status and potentially Ty Simpson into Heisman talks, is going to play the Vanderbilt Commodores once again. So it is a very similar setup to the dynamic of last season, except for one key distinction, and that is everyone's already taking Vanderbilt seriously. Diego Pavia and the crew aren't sneaking up on anyone. but they also may not need to because this team is just better than last year's team. This Vanderbilt team looks absolutely legit, beating Virginia Tech by 24, beating South Carolina by 24. They're blowing people out. They're the number one scoring offense in the country, averaging 50 points a game through 5 games. This is just a really, really, really good team. So when you talk about their defense, or not their defense, their offense being so elite, can either defense step up? Because Alabama, outside of the Florida State game, their offense has been elite. 73 on ULM, 38 on Wisconsin, and then 24 on Georgia. And it's particularly been the passing game, right? They can't run the ball that well. And even when Jan Miller came back against Georgia, their run game didn't seem to improve that much. But Jeremy Bernard, Ryan Williams, Isaiah Horton, and with Ty Simpson's accuracy, they have been able to be a pretty explosive pass offense. Now they haven't been explosive to the degree Vanderbilt's been offensively, but they've still put up a lot of points. So I think you're looking at a shootout type of game, and if either defense can get a key turnover or just play their best game of the season, because Vanderbilt's defense has serious questions. You look at giving up, I think, 35 to Utah State, right? They're allowing points on some weaker competition, but when the time came against South Carolina, and I know Lenore Sellers missed most of that game, they played excellent defense, and in the second half against Virginia Tech, same thing. So I've seen their defense step up, and I think they have the potential to do it again, and it's the same thing with Alabama. We've seen their defense look really bad at times, especially against the run, against Florida State, and at times against Georgia. But we've also seen them step up in some key spots in that Georgia game. So if either defense is going to make a critical play, an interception, a fumble forced, or just get a big stop, I think it could swing the game, and one I think is going to be in the high 20s, low 30s scoring, if I had to guess. I think there's going to be a good amount of points put up. And then the final thing is talking about Vanderbilt scaling, because yes, they've beaten teams like South Carolina and Virginia Tech, but I do think it is clear those teams, Virginia Tech's coach already got fired, and South Carolina already with Lenore Sellers isn't top tier competition, and they played most of that game without. So there's a clear gap in my mind between those two teams and the Alabamas of the world. So when Vanderbilt now goes on the road to play what I think is a true contender in the SEC, something they haven't had to do yet, will this offense still scale? Will it still look like one of the best in college football? Will this team still scale? I believe it will. I think this is legitimately one of the 10 to 15 best teams in the country, and I think the offense will still look really strong. I think they'll run the ball well, and I think Diego Pavia will put up numbers. Like I said, I think it's going to be low 30s, and I think it's a tight game. But just because you're one of the 10 to 15 best teams in the country doesn't mean you can go on the road into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama. I think Georgia's one of the 10 to 15 best teams in the country. They couldn't even pull it off at home. So I think Vanderbilt will prove they are a legit player in the SEC, that they're legitimately a really good team. To ask them to go on the road into Alabama, an Alabama team that also will be looking to get a little bit of revenge for last year's upset, I think is too tall of a task. I would go Alabama here, maybe 34-27 type of game. I think Vanderbilt's going to put up a lot of yards, but I think Bama's defense can make one key play, maybe get a strip sack on Pavia, maybe force a fumble when he's running with the ball, and I think their pass game will look elite. I expect a big day from Ty Simpson, and the Tide, I think, get another big win. Third game, and I think this is a game flying under the radar because I think people don't really take Houston seriously, but we're talking about two undefeated teams in the Big 12, and Houston is at home here. So Texas Tech, while I think and I've talked about it, I think most people would agree, they sort of set themselves up as the class of the Big 12. You're still going on the road in a conference game against another undefeated opponent, and yeah, the winner of this game is going to be atop of the Big 12. There's huge stakes here. I feel like it definitely deserves a preview video. The keys to the game: Houston's pass defense in yards, it's 7th, in yards per play, I believe it's 13th, but either way, it's been a really strong pass defense. You could talk about who they've played. Their best competition is Colorado when they were playing Ryan Staub. They played Malik Murphy and Oregon State last week, who are getting better but still haven't won a game. So obviously they haven't faced anything like Texas Tech, who has the number one pass offense in college football when it comes to yards per game. And then yards per play, they're still near the top as well when it comes to their pass offense. And then overall offense, they're also, I believe, top 3. They might be number 1 in total yards per game. The Texas Tech offense has been elite. Baron Morton should be playing in this game. He's put up a ton of yards virtually every game. And yeah, this Houston pass defense, if they're going to have any chance, I think is going to have to play like a top 10 pass defense. It can't just be, oh, we've been a top 10 pass defense because we're playing Oregon State and Colorado as our best opponents. If Houston is legitimately a top 10 pass defense, then they've got a chance. If they're not, then I don't see how you're going to stop the Texas Tech offense. And when we further break this down, talking about the Texas Tech defense, things could get out of hand. Speaking of that defense, the run defense for Texas Tech is going to be really important because Houston's strength is running the ball. And this Texas Tech defensive line, look, we saw it against Utah, and we've seen it pretty much everyone they played. They've been an elite run defense. And for me, if that Utah offensive line couldn't get, push up front, I doubt Houston can. Texas Tech shuts down the run, forces Connor Wigman into throwing situations, then, in must-throw situations, not where you have the option to throw. The whole defense knows you have to throw because you've held them to 1 yard on first down and 2 yards on second down. Now it's 3rd and 7, and Wigman has to drop back, and David Bailey and Romello Height can rush the passer, and you're throwing into coverage where they're dropping a bunch of people back, and now Houston's just struggling all day on 3rd down, can't move the ball, not putting up points, and on the other side, Texas Tech is doing their typical thing, and Barrett Morton has 300 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. That kind of thing. That's how I could see a potential blowout even occurring in this game, and Texas Tech is favored by double digits. Finally, we talk about the common opponent, Oregon State. Oregon State allowed the most yards passing to any quarterback in the country when they played Texas Tech and Barrett Morton. Texas Tech won 45-14. Oregon State played Houston. They went into overtime. Houston won by 3. It's a little bit of a different dynamic. Of course, Houston was on the road in a Friday night game a week before their big home game with Texas Tech coming in. So it was a bit of a look-ahead spot trap game, sort of the way Florida State Virginia was for Florida State playing Miami this week. Same type of thing for Houston, but they actually got the win. So I'm not saying you can do, oh, look, Houston was close to Oregon State, Texas Tech blew out Oregon State, so Texas Tech's clearly better. But I do still think we can take away, if Houston was Texas Tech's caliber, I think it would have been a little more convincing against an Oregon State team that hasn't got a win. And I think it's very clear that no one, or at least that Houston is not to Texas Tech's caliber. And I don't think any Big 12 team looks like they are. Just in terms of how good Texas Tech is on the line of scrimmage, I think that's just going to swing a lot of games their way. They're going to be able to run the ball well. They're going to be able to stop the run. And that's just going to make life so much easier on them. And in this big spot off a bye, they've had time to prepare. For me, it's a clear-cut Texas Tech win. I do think it's going to be double digits, probably 2 touchdowns. If I had to say, I'd go 38, maybe 17 Texas Tech, something like that. I think Texas Tech wins this one convincingly. I truly believe they are one of the best teams in the country. Taking a break from the predictions, it is time to unveil the 1-of-1 top 25. And before we do this, these are going to be the most controversial rankings I put out on the channel. I already know they'll probably get some pushback. People will be upset. But so I need to talk about some things, and we can put up the graphic. This is 25 through 21, and this is who dropped out, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. But what I need people to remember is these rankings are not predicting the future. This isn't who do I truly think the best teams are. For example, Notre Dame at 24, I actually think is a much better team than the 24th best team in the country. I think they lost by a total of 4 points to 2 teams that are going to be very high on the list. You'll see that. So that's first off what we're not doing. I'm not just saying who I think the best teams are. You have to earn your spot. The second thing, it's also not predicting what's going to happen next week. So a team could be ranked pretty high that I expect to lose in the following weeks, and I don't actually think is that good, but based on what they've done so far, has earned that spot. And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes when things get controversial. But yeah, so TCU dropped out after losing to ASU by 3 on the road. They were one of my first teams out here. Not the other teams weren't. TCU, though, was competing for that 25th spot along with a team like Houston, BYU, 2 other undefeated teams in the Big 12. So they were right there. Washington, I was really disappointed by their performance against Ohio State. Same with USC against Illinois. And Auburn now back-to-back losses where the offense has just looked atrocious. They drop out of the rankings. And then 25, ASU slides back in, beating TCU. Notre Dame, the blowout win against Arkansas is really impressive. And as the record improves, because right now it's still not great, obviously, with the 2 losses, but then that record gets improved, Notre Dame's going to keep climbing. But the 4 factors here, right, when you're ranking teams for me, it's record, it's your strength of record, so, best wins, worst losses, all that factored in. Who have you played? So record, strength of record, eye test, all that's factored in. So Notre Dame, eye test really strong, and it's just the record's not there yet. So when they win more games, they'll move higher because I really like this team, especially offensively. Mississippi State doesn't really change. I was somewhat impressed by, even in a loss to Tennessee, they were really competitive, and they have the head-to-head win over ASU, so they're going to stay ranked above the Sun Devils. We'll talk more about head-to-head in a second. South Florida stays at 22. Look, if they keep winning, the blowout loss to Miami isn't going to be enough to drop them completely out of the rankings, most likely. And then Georgia Tech was one of the strangest teams because they essentially lost to Wake Forest. With the ACC coming out and saying, oh yeah, we missed the offside call, there's no if they had done it, maybe Georgia Tech would have lost. No, the game's just over. Wake Forest just kneels the ball, and it's done. And we're talking about, instead of 5-0 Georgia Tech, a 4-1 Georgia Tech with a loss to Wake Forest. So on one hand, they're technically undefeated. On the other hand, with what I watched, you virtually lost to Wake Forest, a team I don't think is good. So it was hard for me to judge, so I dropped them down 5 spots to 21, and I just don't know what to make of this Georgia Tech team right now. One of the hardest teams for me to rank, personally. And then we move to 20 through 16. So Texas comes in at 20, Michigan 19, LSU 18, Tennessee 17, Georgia 16, right? So Texas and Michigan basically just move up from last week. The teams dropping behind them. Michigan on a bye, Texas also on a bye, actually, right? But yeah, so last time we saw Texas, Arch Manning was playing better against Sam Houston. I believe the defense is really strong. Don't know about the offense, but I guess we'll find out a little bit against Florida because Florida at least has a strong defense. Michigan has the win against Nebraska, loss against Oklahoma, but they're really great running the ball. Defense looks really strong as well there. LSU, similar to Texas, but the resume's better. I know Clemson isn't a great win, but you have the Clemson win. Florida's not a great win, but you have the Florida win, which is better than the wins Texas has, so that's kind of the 2-spot gap there. Strong defense, struggling offense, can't run the ball, so it's the same type of team. Now we get into teams I think have proven, or I think are really good. Tennessee, the Mississippi State win is a good win. Syracuse, a pretty good win, especially considering Steve Angeli was still playing when you beat Syracuse. But you have the head-to-head loss at home to Georgia. And Georgia, obviously going to be ranked ahead before that. And you went to overtime, super competitive game, very similar teams, very strong teams, but Georgia's going to get the nod because of head-to-head, right? It would be weird for me to say Tennessee, just rank Tennessee ahead of Georgia because they're better than Georgia, right? That would be weird. So here we go. So here is 15 through 11. Alabama, 15. You beat Georgia. That earned you a lot of credit. You move up to 15. I'm not moving you ahead of Florida State. You've played 4 games. Florida State has played 4 games. You are both 3-1. Your best win is against Georgia, meaning you are better than Georgia. I ranked you ahead of Georgia. Florida State's best win is against you. So Florida State has the better win. You've both blown out inferior competition. You lost to Florida State. They lost to Virginia. You say, well, Virginia's not good. Why? Virginia's 4-1 with a better win than either of you because they beat Florida State. And I know it's somewhat circular, but that's how it has to work at this point in the season because resume-wise, Florida State has to be ahead of Alabama. When you have comparable resumes, whether it be same record, and we've seen the game. You beat them by 2 touchdowns. And I'm not evaluating, this isn't what have you done for me lately. And I know that's not how rankings work because otherwise we would see, at the end of the year, like Kansas last year got hot down the stretch. They weren't suddenly a top 15 team because they beat the top teams of the Big 12. The whole body of work matters, and it always has in college football. And right now, 25% of the sample size for Alabama is a blowout loss to Florida State. Florida State has to be ahead. And then the same thing for them. 25% of your sample size is a really tight loss to Virginia. I think you're really close teams, at least I think the resume shows you're really competitive close teams when you lose a game like that in overtime on the road. You were super competitive. But Virginia's a 4-1 team. The offenses look great. They have the big win against Florida State. Sure, they lost the road game to NC State, but NC State's lost multiple games. But you could just easily say, throw out that one, right? The same way people want to throw out Alabama lost to Florida State. So I think all these teams, from what they've shown on the field, have similar resumes, and head-to-head is going to get the nod. So do I truly believe Virginia is the 13th best team in the country? No. If I had to pick, they play Louisville on the road this week. I think Virginia's going to lose that game. But it doesn't matter what I think because I thought Alabama was going to beat Florida State in week one. I thought Alabama would be undefeated at this point in the season. So what I believe about the teams isn't actually important. This is about what you earn on the field. And Virginia has earned to be ahead of Florida State, who's earned to be ahead of Alabama, ahead of Georgia, ahead of Tennessee. That's just the way it works. So you say like, oh, you're just overalling head to head. That's what matters. That's why we play the games. What's the point? If we're 4 games in the season throwing out head to head results, what are we doing? Like, anyways, that's my rant. Moving on, Missouri's 12. They're undefeated. They've looked great. Penn State 11. Penn State fans maybe wish they still had Missouri's quarterback. Maybe. I'm just saying Bo Prabula looks pretty good at Missouri. Penn State just outside the top 10 because do I think Penn State's a top 10 team? Yeah, you lost to a team that would be really up there and I've said very favorable things about in the past few weeks. But the wins aren't there. There's no strong wins. I can't reward you top 10 for just a loss. At least in my opinion, I don't think that's how it should work. So that is 11 through 15. Back into the predictions, and we have Mississippi State going on the road to take on the Texas A&M Aggies. And first, I just want to say Mississippi State is good. Like, they beat ASU, a team that I think most people think is a generally pretty good team. You beat them, and you took Tennessee, a team I think most people think is a really good team, to overtime. Could have easily gone the other way. So at the very least, I think it's fair to say Mississippi State is a solid team, but the point spread doesn't seem to agree because last week Texas A&M at home against Auburn, an Auburn team coming off a road, so this was going to be your second road game in a row. You were coming off a road loss to Oklahoma, so that was going to hurt you a little bit, and A&M was off a bye at home, and with all that, A&M was only a 6.5 point favorite over Auburn. Now Mississippi State comes off sort of an emotional loss at home to Tennessee, a similar thing to Auburn, and goes on the road to A&M. But A&M doesn't have the rest advantage. They both played last week, and it's a 14.5 point spread. So it's like they're saying there's a touchdown difference between Mississippi State and Auburn in their point spread models, which for me, I just can't get behind with what I've seen from these teams. I think maybe Auburn's a little better, but they look I don't even know if I would say that. They look super comparable, and Auburn's offense the past couple weeks looks pretty bad, and A&M did beat Auburn by 6, so the point spread was right there. So I think Mississippi State is being underrated because of preseason expectations. I think they can be very competitive in this game. I do think A&M still has the scheduling advantage, getting another home game off a team like an emotional loss. I think that usually is a good dynamic to have if Mississippi State could have a bit of a hangover performance, losing one that you feel was right there, your big opportunity to get the home win against Tennessee. That dynamic I do think favors the Aggies. And I want to talk about A&M turnovers because the only way you almost lost the Auburn game was Marcel Reed throwing the pick that was almost a pick 6 and then it was like a 2-yard touchdown for Auburn. And really, I think the only way A&M could have lost that game was through turnovers. And we've seen Marcel Reed look really strong in the Notre Dame game, but we've also seen plays where that was a questionable decision. And this Mississippi State defense, their pass defense had been really strong. Tennessee exposed it a little bit, but they've still been very opportunistic. They beat ASU in large part because they won the 2 turnover battle, forcing 2 turnovers. They nearly beat Tennessee because of forced turnovers, and if the offense hadn't given Tennessee 2 touchdowns, the offense gave Tennessee 14 points with a scoop and score and a pick 6. So if not for their own offensive turnovers, Mississippi State likely wins the game because of their defense forcing big turnovers. And so this is a theme for Mississippi State. If they can do it again on a quarterback in Marcel Reed, who has had a little bit of decision-making problems, you could see him turning the ball over, then, I think that's how Mississippi State potentially wins this game. If they're not doing that, I don't think their defense holds up well enough against, the likes of Mario Craver, Casey Concepcion. Like A&M, I expect to put up points. Mississippi State has speedsters of their own, Brennan Thompson, who can challenge the Texas A&M pass defense. But overall, A&M is more well-rounded when you look at what they can do in the run game, whether it be at their stable of running backs behind that strong goal line or Marcel Reed making plays with his legs. I think the offense is prepared to win a really, a shootout, and their defense looked much improved last week against Auburn, albeit it was Auburn. So A&M seems to be rounding into form, and for that reason, I think they are going to win this game. Like I mentioned, scheduling advantage at home. Mississippi State, I expect to have a bit of a hangover performance from such an emotional loss, and A&M is just overall more talented, can beat you more ways, and is a team I think is slowly reaching their peak. As I think you've already seen the top offensive performance and you saw a top defense performance. I expect it to start beginning to mesh and play complete football and win this game. I'm just nervous that if it's not there and Marcel Reed has an off day, Mississippi State's opportunistic defense could make this one much closer than the point spreads suggest. I still think it'll be closer than 14.5. I think is the spread. Like I would go A&M, but it'd be something like 30 to 20, something like that for me to predict the Aggies winning this game. Final game we're predicting, and it is the main event in my eyes. Maybe you think it's Vandy, Alabama, but for me, this is the game of the week. It's the big rivalry. It's the Miami Hurricanes on the on the road against Florida State Seminoles. And yes, if Florida State had just managed to win in overtime against Virginia, we'd be talking about a top 10 matchup in one of the biggest rivalries in all of college football. So it is a little bit disappointing to have the air taken out of it. Now College Game Day's not there, right? It's not going to say Miami, Florida State under the radar. But it was beginning to see all this hype for it, and now that's kind of gone. But digging into the game, the FSU run game has been pretty much the best in the country. When you look at total yards rushing a game, they're second only to Navy. But then when you're talking about what are you getting yards per rush combined with total yards, your overall efficiency with the volume, Florida State clearly above Navy and clearly above everyone else in the country. The run game has been elite. They ran the ball really well on Alabama, who I don't think has an elite run defense as Georgia ran the ball on them. I think it's probably a good average to above, slightly above average run defense. I don't think they're as good as Miami's run defense, which has been a top 10 unit when you're talking about yards allowed per rush, and then total yards rushing. They've been really strong as well, right? And Florida couldn't run the ball on them at all. Notre Dame didn't run the ball as well as you thought they would have, but Notre Dame over on the season hasn't ran the ball as well or even tried to run the ball as well as we thought they would, and then saw Florida couldn't run it. Really, no one's been able to run it on Miami. But this is the story for both teams. Florida State facing the best defensive line they're going to face all year, maybe the best defensive line in the country. Miami facing the most potent run game they'll see all year in all likelihood, because Florida State's been the best run game in the country. Who am I favoring in that right now? Slightly Miami, slightly, just because their defensive line looks so athletic, and Ruben Bain is such a game wrecker. Even, I know he's playing the edge position, but he's been great guarding the run as well. He's just been great doing pretty much everything. And I think they're a much better defensive line than Alabama, which is a weird thing to say, but I truly believe the Hurricanes up front are the much better team. And then the FSU defensive line, versing what I think has been maybe the best offensive line in the country in Miami, led by Francis Mauigoa, which is getting just such great push and giving Carson Beck time, and they've been able to run the ball pretty well. And then going against the Florida State defensive line, that's a lot of points. We saw what Virginia just did to them. Virginia looked really good running the ball against Florida State. Chandler Morris, when he wasn't throwing picks, looked really good against Florida State. And if Carson Beck has time, he can be surgical, and pretty much no one has been able to get pressure and not allow him to have time. Can FSU's defensive line do it? I'm skeptical because I feel like they haven't done it against the teams they played that weren't as good up front as Miami. And then finally, I want to talk about the Tommy Castellanos X factor, because the Bama game's in him, where he's running around, he's avoiding people, he's getting yards on the ground, and he's delivering through the air, and he's living up to all the talk he had in the offseason about what he's going to do to Alabama. And then the Virginia game exists, where he's going to have multiple turnovers and kind of cost you a game almost. Like, the highs will be there still in that game. He's going to have down the field shots to Deuce Robinson, and those will still exist. But he can make some pretty questionable plays that could lose you a game. What type of Tommy Castellanos game are we going to get against Miami? Because I don't think it's even, it's against good teams versus bad teams. He's just sort of an up and down player, a bit of a roller coaster, and that makes him unpredictable. If we get high-level Tommy Castellanos and you're at home in this rivalry and the stadium's really into it and you're still running the ball really well, the Florida State's going to be right there and can win this game. But if you get bad Tommy Castellanos and Ruben Bain gets a strip sack and he throws an interception and you're down early and the crowd's taken out of it and Miami feels like they can just assert their will now up front, then it could be a long day for the Seminoles. For me, I am taking Miami. I know it's on the road. I know it's only a 4.5 point spread, and I think Florida State is going to play much better than they did against Virginia, because I do believe it was a trap game. I do think they were looking ahead to this game, and this will be their top level performance. But I think Miami's just too good. I don't think Florida State has the level of athletes Miami has on the line of scrimmage. I talked about it with Texas Tech. You can talk about this for pretty much any type of football. If you're not good enough at the line of scrimmage, or if one team is dominant on the line of scrimmage, that just gives you such a big edge. And Miami this year, I think, appears to have the edge against everyone in the ACC, which is just going to make it really hard to pick against them when they're so good up front. I think Miami wins this game. I'm going 31-23 Canes. All right, that's the last game we had to predict. But before we end the show, let's wrap up with the 1-of-1 top 10 rankings for or heading into Week 6. At 10, I have Iowa State. Talked about it earlier with the prediction against Cincinnati. You have 3 Power 4 conference wins. You beat Kansas State, who, yes, isn't great. You beat an undefeated Arizona team at the time, who knows how good they are, but at least solid. And you beat Iowa in a similar way Indiana beat Iowa. So, decent resume, in my opinion. And Indiana's just one spot ahead because they have the Iowa win. Then they have the Illinois win, which I would say it's comparable to Arizona win, but Indiana just looks so much more impressive. And the ODU win is pretty decent as well. Indiana gets the bye. Next week, gonna face Oregon. Can't wait for that one. And if they manage to pull that one off, yeah, they'll be a lot higher than 9. 8, I have Vanderbilt. And this is just crazy to look at because if you told me coming into the year, like, you'll be almost at the halfway point of the season and your 8, 9, 10 is Vanderbilt, Indiana, Iowa State, I would have been like, what? Like, what is happening? And you're like, you won't have, the Texases in your top 10 or the Alabamas or the Georgia. I'd be like, what are you talking about? But college football is just wild. And yeah, Vanderbilt, look, another offensive explosion from them. They're averaging 50 points a game. Pavia looks great. They've got the wins against South Carolina, Virginia Tech. And yeah, they got the big opportunity again versus Alabama this week. 7, Texas Tech, off a bye, so it's all the same things I said before. Their D-line looked elite and was so impressive against Utah. They have the number 1 passing offense in the country. You combine those things, you get what, in my opinion, is a legit top 10 team in the country. And then at 6, I have Oklahoma, who was on a bye. And look, if John Mateer, this is still all the sample that John Mateer played in. If they look like a different team with Michael Hawkins, then they could drop, potentially. But right now, it's all based off what they've done so far this season, and that includes a really strong win against Michigan, a good win against Auburn, elite defensive performances, and a quarterback that was playing really good ball. Into the top 5. At 5, we have the Ole Miss Rebels, who the offense looks great. Trinidad Chambliss has been really strong. Austin Simmons maybe taking back the spot, maybe not. I don't know, but either quarterback I fully believe in. I fully believe in the Lane Kiffin offense, and the defense the past few weeks has been looking stronger as well. Now, albeit LSU's offense hasn't really been impressive against anyone, but Tulane's has, and you shut down Tulane, and you did a good job against LSU, and you have 3 conference wins already in Arkansas, Kentucky, and LSU, so you're building quite the resume. The Rebels come in at number 5, just 1 spot behind A&M, who it's kind of a mixed bag because the Notre Dame win is really strong, but the defense didn't look that great. The offense did. Then the Auburn win is strong, but the offense didn't look great, and the defense did. But it's kind of me sort of judging that I think it's blending together. So now that I've seen the elite defense, seen the elite offense, it's a little bit more comprehensive than from Ole Miss, where I don't know that I've seen great defense. It may just be inferior offensive competition in LSU and Tulane. And I understand you could make the same argument for Auburn. So it was really splitting hairs here. I just think A&M has looked slightly better than Ole Miss. But that being said, if they played next week, I very well might take Ole Miss. They're right there. The margins are so thin for these top undefeated teams in the SEC. At 3, I have Miami. They drop, but it was just really because of who's going to jump ahead of them. We just talked about them. The O-line has been really strong, maybe the best in the country. Same with the D-line. You have game wreckers in Bain and Mesidor on the edge. Carson Beck, when given time, has looked really strong. The receiver core has been better than expected. Overall, this team looks like one of the elite in the country, and I'll talk about that more in a second. 2 is Ohio State. Really impressed with their win against Washington. I thought that was going to be a 1-possession game. I thought their defense was going to allow upwards of 20 points. Nope, they held them to 6. They proved that this bend-don't-break approach where, yes, you might get yards, but you're just not going to score. You're not going to put up touchdowns. It's at this point, it's not coincidence. They're just that good at it. And, yeah, with all the weapons they have on the outside, with how accurate Julian Sand's been, they look like an elite team. But Oregon, in my opinion, winning on the road in the whiteout is just a better win than Ohio State has. I think Dante Moore has just looked better than Julian Sand. I said I think he's going to win the Heisman Trophy. Oregon's O-line looks amazing. The receivers are getting better. And when you just factor in how young and inexperienced this team is to already go on the road and beat Penn State, I know it went to double overtime, but it was clear Oregon was better than Penn State. I was just so impressed with that. And you combine with how dominant they've been before that against weaker competition, they now have the strong win, and I'm ready to move them to number one. I've already been saying I think they're the best team in the country. I predicted them to win the national championship. Now they have the win for me to put them there. And I'm ready to say, maybe I'll regret this, but I think we have a tier one in college football, and it is 1, 2, and 3, Oregon, Ohio State, Miami. After that, there's a cutoff. I fully expect the national champion to be from one of these three teams. I think they look a tier ahead of the rest of college football. With that being said, that is all I have for today's show. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment who are your top teams. Maybe give me a top 5, a top 10, and who do you have winning this week's biggest games. Until next time.